Hello, Adult Sunday School leader. Hope you're having a great week so far. My wife and I, we made it back from South Carolina with no issues, and that's always good. And the temperatures here in southeast Arkansas, they're running in the 50s in the morning, maybe getting up to 80 or so. Now it's going to get warmer here in the next week or so, but it's wonderful right now, and I hope you're having a great week as well. Well, we are in the very last lesson of this unit on Philippians. It's called Joy and Contentment. It's out of Philippians chapter 4, verses 10 through 20. And the main thought of this lesson is that believers find joyous contentment in God's eternal presence. Well, I'm going to do something a little bit different in this prep talk. Usually we kind of go through the verses and kind of pick out some key points and all that. But I'm going to center on one verse, and that's Philippians 4:13. I think it's very important to do that, number one, because the whole lesson revolves around contentment, and that's what this verse is about. Also, it's a verse that's taken out of context so often. So I think it's important to hone in on this verse and do some deep diving into it, to see what's going on. Now, your leader guide has, of course, great background material and lesson plans and all that stuff. So I'm just going to center on this one verse, all right? So as we know, who wrote this letter? Who wrote the book of Philippians? Well, it was the Apostle Paul. And when do we first see him? We see him in Acts chapter 7. And of course, at that time, he's known as Saul, and he's holding the clothes of someone, or not the clothes of someone, he's holding the clothes of people who are stoning someone. And that someone, of course, is Stephen, the first recorded Christian martyr. And so that's a position of pride for Saul. He's trying to stamp out that renegade cult. And then we see him again in Acts chapter 9, and he's on his way to persecute even some more Christians, and he runs into the bright light. Saul, Saul, why are you persecuting me? And of course, Saul answers, who are you? And the answer is, I am Jesus, whom you are persecuting. So we know the story, don't we? Saul's blinded. He didn't eat or drink for 3 days. And the men whom he was with led him into Damascus. And in Damascus, there's this man named Ananias who has a vision from the Lord to go and heal Saul. Well, now that's like, us getting a command to go heal Osama bin Laden or Adolf Hitler. The enemy is, why would Ananias want to do that? The Lord is insistent, go heal Saul. And so he did. Okay, he did. So Ananias goes, he finds Saul, he lays his hands on him, his sight's restored, Saul's sight is restored. And so Saul goes from being this big man in Judaism, right? He's a Pharisee. He's a Pharisee of the Pharisees. He's a Hebrew of the Hebrews. He goes from being this big man in Judaism to this outcast of the Jewish hierarchy. But he's outcast from them, but he's still feared by Christians. He's in this in-between time. So this begins the roller coaster ride of Paul's life. And the reason I'm doing this is just to get a big picture, big background picture of Paul's life and to exactly what he means when he's talking here in Philippians 4:13. So he goes on and he preaches. He starts preaching. And of course, some are converted, but many reject his message and reject him, and they seek to kill him. In Acts chapter 14, we see that Paul is in Iconium. Paul and Barnabas are preaching boldly, and both Jews and Greeks become believers. But the Jews who refuse to believe, they are stirring up some trouble, and they want to stone them. And so Paul and Barnabas find this out, and they leave. They go to Lystra, they go to Derbe, they heal a man who's never walked. The townspeople proclaimed them to be gods. And what did they say? No, hey, we're just human, okay? We're just humans. Don't worship us as gods. Still, the townspeople wanted to sacrifice to them. And even though they were wrong, they knew that this town was at least listening to them, okay? And then what happened? Jews from Iconium and Antioch came, and the crowd was won over to the Judaizer side. And they took Paul and they stoned him and they left him for dead. Well, a couple of points here. And one is, that's what happened to Jesus. First, as he went into Jerusalem on that Palm Sunday, what did they cry? Hosanna. What did they cry a few days later? Crucify him. So Paul experienced this swing from being up here to being worshipped like a god to being stoned and left for dead, just like Jesus had, kind of the same thing Jesus went through that last week. Also, Paul had been a participant in stonings before, like we saw as he was holding the coats of those stoning Stephen. And a stoning, you are hit, you are pummeled with stones until you're dead. And so that's what happened here. They stoned Paul. They thought he was dead. They left him for dead. They dragged him outside the city, left him for dead there, but he survived. Later on, Paul and Barnabas have this sharp disagreement. And, Barnabas was the one who believed in Paul first. Okay. So anyway, they parted company, and Paul then took Silas. They went through Syria. They were strengthening churches. Then they go on to Philippi. Of course, that's the location of this church to whom Paul is writing that we've been studying for 6 weeks. And so they meet this lady. Her name's Lydia. She sells purple cloth. And we don't think too much of that, but to produce the dye of this royal color, this purple color, and to us that's not anything anymore, but back then people had to collect and smash these sea snails and smash them for their juices, and it was a purple juice. And so it was very difficult, it was very labor intensive, it was very expensive. And so for her to be the proprietor of something like that and to sell this expensive stuff meant that she was a wealthy woman. And of course, it's always nice to have somebody with some financial means in your church, isn't it? Also at Philippi, Paul was the case of some businessmen losing their income. See, Paul had cast out the spirit of the female slave. She had made money for her master by predicting the future, but she didn't see her own deliverance coming. She didn't predict that. Of course, the businessmen, the owners, got angry, and they stirred up dissension. They had Paul and Silas thrown in jail. Here's where we have the earthquake, the story of the Philippian jailer. He comes to Christ. Well, it's to the church there at Philippi that Paul's writing the words that we're looking at tonight. Well, the whole letter that we've looked at for 6 weeks. And so the story continues. The same song, different verse of all these ups and downs. Thessalonica, Athens, Corinth. Good response, then hatred, then beatings. And here's what Paul has to say about his life. This is out of 2 Corinthians chapter 11, verses 24 through 28. Here's what that passage has to say. 5 times I received from the Jews 40 lashes, minus 1. 3 times I was beaten with rods. Once I was pelted with stones. 3 times I was shipwrecked. I spent a night and a day in the open sea. I've been constantly on the move. I've been in danger from rivers, in danger from bandits, in danger from my fellow Jews, in danger from Gentiles, in danger in the city, in danger in the country, in danger at sea, and in danger from false believers. I have labored and toiled and have often gone without sleep. I have known hunger and thirst, and have gone often without food. I've been cold and naked. Besides everything else, I face daily the pressure of my concern for all the churches. That is something else. That's his life. So Paul definitely had this roller coaster ride in his life after he became a believer. He went from having those highs, worshipped as a god, people coming to Christ, and then the downward of being beaten and left for dead, pelted, and all these other things that he just mentioned here. So that's the context of the Apostle Paul and his life. Now, we're going to briefly look. I know we've been looking for 6 weeks now in the book of Philippians, but just to get an overall context of the book of Philippians. All right, so in chapter 1, we have a salutation, thanksgiving, and prayer. Paul discusses how his hardships, specifically his chains that he's in, the persecution, the imprisonment, all this has served to advance the gospel. He's looking on the brighter side of things, isn't he? Get to chapter 2, he encourages to imitate the humility of Christ, not to do anything out of selfish ambition, but to do everything without complaining or grumbling. Then we get to chapter 4, that's where we are now. Last week, we looked at the appeal for unity in the church, and he addressed those 2 women who apparently had some kind of disagreement. And the command was to rejoice in all circumstances and not to be anxious about anything. And he also thanked the Philippian church for their gifts. And so that brings us to where we are this week. Paul states, he thanks them for the gifts, but he states, thank you, but I'm really not in need. And why is that? Because he learned to be content in every circumstance. Now, content, it really doesn't fit into today's language, does it? We're not content about anything. We're always restless, wanting to do something new, better, different. Now, it is good to want to improve and do things, but we're not content with electronics of today, because tomorrow they're out of date, not as flashy, not as shiny. The cars, the houses, you know that. You can do a good job of explaining that to your class. So yeah, Paul says, I'm not needed because I'm content in every circumstance. So here's what he says in Philippians chapter 4, and this is in this week's text. Philippians chapter 4, verses 11 and 12. So this is right before the one verse that we're going to hone in on. He said, I am not saying this because I am in need, for I have learned to be content whatever the circumstances. I know what it is to be in need. I know what it is to have plenty. I have learned the secret of being content in any and every situation, whether well-fed or hungry, whether living in plenty or in want. So he laid it out there. He's been all these things: well-fed, hungry. He's had plenty. He's been in need. He's had good times, bad situations, but he's learned the secret of survival, and that is being content in whatever situation he finds himself in. So all this leads us up, all that we've talked about for probably 15 minutes has led up to our next verse, the verse that I'm going to center on, Philippians 4:13. I'm going to read to you first out of the King James Version. Okay, here's what it says. I can do all things through Christ, which strengtheneth me. Okay, we know that. We've heard that. We've heard various translations of that verse, a very common verse. But here's the problem. This is a verse that's used by Christian athletes to indicate that they can win the game. It's used by people to basically state, I can do anything I put my mind to. Jesus plus me is a majority, so get out of my way, right? No obstacle can stand in my way with Christ being on my side. But here's the thing. This verse is not about getting what you want. It's not about winning the game. It's not about getting the promotion. It's not about getting the guy or gal of your dreams. Generally speaking, it's not about you, okay? It's about being content. It's about being content when you lose the game. It's about being content when you get bypassed for that promotion. It's being content when you can't get a date to save your life. Generally speaking, it's about God's power to work in you, allowing you to be content, allowing you to endure not just the highs, but the lows of life as well. This verse isn't about giving you license to pursue the desires of your heart. It's not about God's resources are right there at your disposal and you can achieve your earthly dreams and avoid hard times. And why is that? Well, what's Paul's situation right now? He's in prison. Don't you think if that's what this verse meant, that he could do all things and he could be miraculously released from prison, which of course happened at Philippi, where the opportunity presented itself at Philippi. But that's not what he's talking about here. Remember, Paul's hardships, they were instrumental in the advancement of the gospel, and that's how he looked at it. See, God gives us grace and strength through Christ to endure those temporary hardships in order for the long-term kingdom advancement. Yeah, not everything is for our benefit. Sometimes we're hitting some lows because the overall advancement of the kingdom is being pushed, is being pursued. If this verse were for a person's own personal advancement, then why didn't Paul take advantage of that promise? Like I said a minute ago, why did he have to suffer so much? Why didn't he just rub the lamp, so to speak, and avoid getting beaten? Why not do that and get out of jail? Why didn't that happen? Well, Philippians 4:13 does not obligate God to empower our plans. It does, however, remind us that God does empower us to accomplish his plan and then endure the rough road that his plan might lead us down. That's what the verse is about. And that's why the NIV, the New International Version, translates this verse, I can do all this through him who gives me strength, because referring back to all those things that he just mentioned. I can do all this, all these things that I just mentioned because of him who gives me strength. You see, this goes hand in hand with 2 Corinthians chapter 12. And in this chapter, Paul mentioned that he had some thorn in the flesh, and he asked God to remove it, whatever it was, 3 times. Let me read that to you. It's going to be out of 2 Corinthians chapter 12, verses 8 through 10. Here's what those verses say. 3 times I pleaded with the Lord to take it away from me. But he said to me, my grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. Therefore, I will boast all the more gladly about my weakness, so that Christ's power may rest on me. That is why, for Christ's sake, I delight in weaknesses, insults, hardships, persecutions, difficulties. For when I am weak, then I am strong. See, when Paul's weak, when he's at his lowest, then the strength of God comes through, the perseverance, the ability to endure that comes through. It allows him to endure all these things, all the weaknesses, insults, persecutions, hardships, all of those things. So all this to say that the Christian life is not necessarily an easy life. I think most of us realize that, don't we? What did Jesus tell his disciples in John 16:33? In this world you will have trouble. Also, I'll read to you 2 Corinthians chapter 4, verses 7, 8, and 9 says this, but we have this treasure in jars of clay to show that this all-surpassing power is from God and not from us. We are hard-pressed on every side, but not crushed. We're perplexed, but not in despair. We're persecuted, but not abandoned. We're struck down, but not destroyed. We always carry around in our body the death of Jesus, so that the life of Jesus may also be revealed in our body. That went through verse 10. So, through all this, we can endure these things through Christ. All of these things through Christ who gives us strength. So, that's a big, long explanation and background about Paul and his life. Maybe you can take a minute or 2 of that and add it to your lesson this week, or you may just want to use the whole thing. I don't know. But anyway, all that to say, what? God doesn't grant everything we want. He's not the genie in a bottle. It's not that I can do everything through him who gives me strength. You know, I'm not going to be able to jump off the Empire State Building and survive because I claim this verse. I can't go out on the football field and claim this verse and be assured of victory. Okay, that's not the meaning of this verse. So let's please not use it like that. Okay, and you'll see Facebook memes that use this verse incorrectly all the time. So anyway, just beware. That's all I have for this week. Don't forget to pray with and for your class. Thank you guys so much for watching. I really do appreciate you.